Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino's Security Confidential. Today, we are honored to have Jake Belcher join us. Jake is an old hat at cybersecurity. He's the Senior Director of Security Strategy at VillageMD. He has over 20 years of IT and security experience building, operating, and enhancing risk management, security awareness, and governance. Jake has worked with many C-suite executives and boards of directors. He is also a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh's Katz School of Business. And I'm glad to have another Pittsburgh person on this show. It's rare that we ever get anybody else other than myself from Pittsburgh on this.
There's dozens of us, right?
Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here, Jake.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
So, Jake, there's we had the CEO of, oh boy, did I just have a senior moment. Emily's going to have to edit this one out, but I know I'm going to remember it. We had the CEO of Gift Health on the show, and that was a very interesting conversation. And it was interesting to hear him speak about the healthcare landscape and how the online presence is really changing the business. That's true. Right. And really how and then cybersecurity becomes not a nice to have, but it's an absolute essential, right, from a whole. And he rattled off a plethora of things that become issues if they get hit. But I know you're from VillageMD, so yeah. What does VillageMD do? Like, what's the business there?
Yeah, great question. So VillageMD takes what we're really doing is managing physician practices. So we're building up a network of physician practices across the U.S. And we help manage those as we bring them on board. And we've just recently had a very large investment from Walgreens. So we are helping them with their mission of rolling out physician practices with primary care, more primary care doctors in the actual office rather than, in some of the other models that you see out in the wild. It's, nurse practitioners and other folks. So we're actually trying to bring in primary care doctors. And we're, like I said, we had this large investment from Walgreens, and we're helping reach out to underserved communities through that as well. So trying to get doctors in areas that maybe are a little underserved from a healthcare perspective. And that's kind of what we do. So we're building that out. We're still, we're late stage startup, I would say. But with the investment from Walgreens, really maturing the organization and moving in that direction.
One question that came to mind as you were describing the relationship that is going in place with Walgreens, doesn't that conflict with the Minute Clinic? I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I think they're just doing a whole rebranding, so I don't know if it'll be, that's a great question. It's not something that's really ever popped up. It was more, hey, this is what we want to do. And, Walgreens wanted to move in this model, like I said, of more physician focused care versus then, going into like a Minute Clinic or another type of clinic where it's more nurse practitioners. Not that they can't provide, service, but this was the model that they were looking for. And specifically with their social mission, really trying to get out into communities that have been historically underserved. So with Walgreens footprint, we have that inroad into doing that. So it aligned really well for the executives. They were real happy about it. And Walgreens made a very large investment in us, and we're trying to.
That's fantastic. Yeah, you guys are you guys are going to do great because the service is very much needed.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm sure there's a lot of eyes on you. And I'm sure not all of them are good ones. I mean, there's a world of bad actors out there. I don't know if you saw today, Data Breach had a article. I think it was a healthcare system in Texas got breached for 1.4 million records they lost.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
So, which really begs the question, like how has cybersecurity changed the healthcare business? Or how is healthcare impacted by cybersecurity?
Right.
I guess
Right. Yeah, I think it's been, just like a lot of industries, right? So, take retail, for example. Before online retailing and things like that, it was more, you go into a store, they might have a credit card reader. Way back in the day, it might have been one of those, you swipe the thing across with the carbon paper and you get an imprint, and then they moved to point of sale. And I think, in that industry as well, when online became a viable channel, you started seeing a big uptick in, okay, well, now we have something to protect, and we need to start dedicating some resources to it. I think healthcare is kind of going through a similar um, revolution that we saw in other sectors a while back. I think it might be just lagging a little bit because, honestly, a lot of it is, in healthcare was all around, as it should be, patient focused care, making sure that the patients are getting the care that they need. The healthcare professionals are very focused on that, as we would all hope. And the technology kind of creeps up on them, and they want to start utilizing it. They realize that their patients are utilizing more technology, and realizing that's an avenue for them to reach out and provide better care. But with that come risks. As a security professional, I think of myself more as a risk advisor than anything else.
okay.
And this is another facet of risk that the industry needs to take on and invest in. So I think it's very similar to other industries. I think the unique thing is our data's super um, uh, protected. It's super valuable information. It's very confidential information. It's highly regulated.
It is.
So I would say the difference there is the value of the, not that credit, using the retail analogy again, not that credit card information isn't valuable. Obviously it is, but you take that, you can compare it to this highly regulated information that we are dealing with. The stakes are even higher. Uh,
So, do you know, just a side question on that? Like credit card, if your credit card data is stolen, it's worth about $1.50 on the black market. You look at healthcare data on an individual, it's worth about
mhm.
$20. Why is there such? That's a huge
Yeah,
difference in
sure.
value.
I think it's I think I was an economics major in college. I have a little bit of a non-traditional background. Um,
That's
but
great.
you know, you think of,
Everyone in cybersecurity does, by the way. So don't feel bad about
right,
it. I
but it's actually helped me quite a bit in my career. In economics, you think a lot about reward systems and game theory and things like that. And you think about motivations and why are certain things valued more. I think it just has more. The reason it has more values, you can do more with it. So with the credit card information, there's a lot of controls around it that can, it's only good for a short period of time. Once someone realizes that their credit card information has been breached, it's very easy to shut that down. The information is no longer valuable, so there's a shorter shelf life. I think with PHI, or protected health information, that we deal with, there's a larger shelf life, and you can do more with it, right? So you have, with credit card information, you have one thing you can really do, and you can go charge something, and maybe run up some charges on something. But in a lot of cases, there's legislation in place to make sure that the consumer's not impacted as much. That you can put a cap to it. It's not going to
yeah.
affect you, and they write it off. I think with PHI, that's persistent, right? So that is something that's going to be out there. You could utilize it to do all sorts of things. You could sell it for marketing information, or somebody wants to do that. You could utilize it for spear phishing campaigns, especially if you had access to someone's, a high net worth individual, or,
Oh yeah.
something like that. You could use that information to do some, very sophisticated spear phishing and get access to bank accounts and all sorts of different things, depending on how you crafted that message. So I think that's probably why it's reflected differently on the dark web, if you want to use that term.
Yeah.
Um, that would be my guess. That would be.
No, I think you're spot
Yeah.
on. I think, Jake, you are absolutely spot on. There's a lot more you can do with it. And I love the word
Yeah.
persistent.
Yeah.
And that is something that we should all underline, asterisk, and star, because that is the crux of the problem, is the data is persistent once you have it. And, you know, a simple thing like you go to the doctor's office or go for any medical service, almost everybody at check-in wants your social security number.
Right.
We typically advise people don't give
Sure.
it. It's like make them make up a number and
Yeah.
stick it in
Right.
there. But from a process perspective, why has that not really some things like that? Because that would make the data less persistent.
Sure.
Right? Because I forgot the date of birth, social security number, address, and then I got real personal data that I know what makes Manoj.
Yep.
Well, now I can duplicate
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and do all kinds of stuff. We know of a case where the person's identity got used in a fraud scheme for opioid prescriptions.
Oh, yeah.
So, and the only reason this individual even came to know about it is that when he went to his physician's office, they couldn't write a prescription for certain things. And they're like, you're flagged as a addict.
Yeah. Yeah. You maxed out your.
He's like, wait a minute, I don't even take Tylenol.
Right.
So,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
And then, once you pull that thread on that proverbial sweater, everything started unraveling. And he's like, oh my God.
And I think you hit on something right there too, right? It took him to go to his doctor, to be in a situation where he needed to request something before he was even aware of it. The difference between
That's
that
right.
and a credit card number is you get a statement every week or every month.
That's
You're
true.
looking at it and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't order 12 MacBooks this month. What's going on here? Or you'll get an alert. There's something on you can set up your card to like alert you every time you spend anything. For example, I have a credit card that my wife and I share, and we kind of run a lot of things through it, and I just have every time there's a charge comes through, it just pops up on my phone. I take a look at it. I'm like, oh, okay, this seems reasonable. And I can usually identify 99% of the charges coming through. There's not, I don't think there's a corollary for PHI, right? You don't have something on your phone where it's like constantly monitoring your records, and your
You're
records
right.
are everywhere. Like I can say, hey, my card's with Chase. I know it's just with Chase, for the most part, that particular number and that account is right there. With your PHI, you go to various doctors. You might go to a specialist. You might go to your
Right.
primary care. You might, it's all over the place. So I think it's hard to kind of get your hands around it, compared to, more structured data like credit card numbers and things like that. So I think that might play, a big piece in it too, is just the monitoring capabilities. As a consumer, you have a lot of monitoring capabilities around your credit card information, but you maybe don't have as many resources for your PHI. There's nothing that's like over top, like monitoring all that for you.
You know what? That's something I had not considered. And uh, that's worth the price of admission of this podcast, I guess. There is absolutely something there, because if we look at all the compliances that are in place, whether it be high trust, it be HIPAA,
Mm-hmm.
even SOC 2 applies to a degree
Yeah.
in the medical establishments. They're all for the providers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Everything there is if you look at all the legislation, the penalties, everything is all on the providers. But there is really nothing on the patient side from a regulatory perspective that would empower
For sure.
the individual to be able to do things like call up Experian and say, hey, what do you got on
Right. I think that's a cultural issue, in the U.S. specifically, with our legislation. I mean, look at EU is a great example, right?
that?
GDPR.
Okay.
A big focus on putting the power into the consumer. They can redact any of that PII, personally identifiable information. Sorry, I try not to use acronyms as much as possible, but they can redact all that. There's a lot of it's got teeth. There's big fines. There's big penalties for it. You see some of that in some states within the U.S., but at a federal level, there's really nothing that's overarching that would, I'd say, come close to GDPR. So I wonder if it's not so much a cultural issue in the U.S. where we just have not put a premium on privacy as much as the other parts of the world have. And that may be something that is needed sooner than later.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just with forget which the consumer. I was at a site ordering something for my wife, and there was one option that says "Do not sell my data," and I checked it. And the next question it asks, "What state are you in?"
Yeah.
Oh, you're in Pennsylvania. Y'all don't have anything.
That's right.
These are our privacy guidelines. And then for the heck of it, I actually went back and changed it to California.
Yeah, I bet you got a lot different answer.
I got a lot of totally different screen for that. It's like, all right, what don't you want us to sound like? Wait a minute. Why can't, if you've already gone through the trouble of setting this up
yeah,
at a technical level, there's really no difference between California and Pennsylvania. You could actually let me select the same options.
Oh, for sure.
But they don't.
For sure. Oh, they could implement it across the board. But the kicker is, again, all right, now we're moving into a political discourse. But the kicker is,
well, some of it does that, because one of the questions was what are some policy positions that we could take, and this is something that should have some bipartisan. You would think nothing today is bipartisan, very little.
Yeah.
But you would think you would have some bipartisan support on protecting the American consumer.
You would think, and it was funny as I was looking through, getting prepared for the call and looking through some of the topics that we were going to discuss. Just a recurring thought just kept coming up, and maybe it is my background, again, speaking, but money. It seems to be like the number one motivator here, in a lot of cases. Why don't we have regulation around that? Well, we are in a political climate where you can buy votes pretty easily. We're making it easier and easier every day. And there are vested parties that want the ability to utilize that information once they collect it and sell it again. So as another revenue stream. So if you don't have a lot of protections around it, like in California, right? If you're lucky enough to, or depending on how you feel about that,
depending on your outlook.
If you are in California, let's just say from a information protection perspective, if you're in that state, you have a lot of protections that are granted, for you by the state. In the rest of the country, not as much, right? Massachusetts maybe a little bit.
New York a
little bit, but nothing really consistent at the federal level. Why is that? I think that there's a lot of reasons, but I think there's a lot of folks that make money off of collecting that information and reselling that information to other folks, which is completely legal to do. So, given the way that the laws are currently written. So I think that, honestly, for a lot of the things that we had listed here to talk about today, a lot of it, the motivating factors, what is the number one motivating factor, appears to be money. So how do you get them
on all sides?
On all sides, yeah, coming and going. So, yeah.
I mean, you look at bad actors. Heck, you can get ransomware as a service now.
That's right.
And some of them have even implemented 800 numbers.
Sure. Yeah. It's a full-blown business, right?
Yeah, so if we got you a second time, we'll give you a 10% discount, and you can talk to our customer service rep.
That's right. I mean...
So it is absolutely money. I mean, all joking aside, and that is, some of these policies, like I could see what you're saying makes, if there was a way to implement healthcare record monitoring, and maybe for an entrepreneur out there that's listening, this might be a great business idea because it doesn't exist today.
Mm-hmm.
But if there was a way to actually execute that I know some healthcare providers might be dicey on it, but that would actually help them, because from a risk perspective, I would imagine that lowers their risk, because now you may not be aware of data leakage, but maybe a consumer contacted you.
Yeah.
Maybe the case was genuine, or it could be a fluke, but in either case, you can limit your exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike the case in Texas where they walked away with 1.4 million records, I'm sure that didn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It,
Probably not.
it's been an ongoing. This wasn't somebody that got in there in 5 minutes and said, I'm just going to do a SQL query on 1.5 million. Heck, if nothing else, the CPU cycles would have lit up somebody's alarm
Right.
system.
You would
saying,
think. Well, you would hope.
Right? You would think, what's going on there?
Yeah.
Right. So it's been persistent over time, and some of those things are very, very difficult to find unless you got a SOC team that's really on the top of their game.
That's right. And even then, it's like, we say this. I'm sure you've heard this a million times too, but we say this in our department all the time. It's like we have to be right all the time. The bad actors only have to be right, once.
Only once.
It's like we never.
Only once.
So it's in order to have a SOC like that, like now you're talking about investment, and now we're talking about risk, right? So it's how much risk are you willing to take on? You could really, if you wanted to invest a ton of money into your protections and having a 24/7 SOC that was staffed by an army of analysts and all the tooling out that they can get, but then you have to say, okay, are we buying a $50,000 safe to protect a $5,000 watch? Eventually there's a break point where you have to say, okay, well, we're getting diminishing returns, and there's a risk discussion that has to be had to say, there's a point where you're not you may be spending too much in to get to that super low probability of being breached. So it's a difficult question. I think it's one that boards, companies struggle with every day. Well, that discussion.
I think one thing that may change it, maybe you have some insight on this with risk, is what's happening in the landscape of cybersecurity insurance.
Yeah.
So we look at premiums have been going up at a very high rate for cybersecurity insurance, and they're capping things off, and there's a lot more exclusions going into what is going to get covered.
Yes. Right.
So that may have, because now that ability, you can basically accept risk, you can outsource it, right? Or you can mitigate it. There's only three things you're going to do with this thing.
Sure.
Well, one of those avenues might be severely limited, which has been a tendency to outsource a lot of that.
Oh, I think, yeah, I think a lot of times it appears to be the easiest answer, right? It's just the quick answer. It's like, oh, we're just going to go get cyber insurance, and we're going to cover our risks from that perspective. And, I think, like you said, I've noticed, because I get pulled into these conversations on a yearly basis. Hey, it's time to renew our cyber insurance. I need you to help answer some of these questions. We're going out to the market. We're, and the lawyers will, come knocking on my door and try to give them the best answers I can about our program and, where we are. I have noticed, premiums going through the roof, exclusions. I joke oftentimes, I'm like, what are the chances of this actually paying out? Because it seems like there's so many possible ways that the insurer can say, well, you didn't do this and this and this and this, so we're not going to pay it out. I think it is becoming less of a viable option. I think it's an easy answer, but it's probably not the right answer all the time,
anymore.
Yeah.
There's entire sectors I'll speak to, like oil and gas.
Mm-hmm.
If you are deemed a critical infrastructure company, a lot of them can't even get cyber insurance in 2022.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what they're willing to pay. Like the shale oil drillers here in Pennsylvania, back when they were allowed to drill, but that's another political topic. But okay, let's. I'll avoid that one because I know we get occasional hate mail, but that one would definitely get hate mail on that. But
Yeah, that's a tough.
they're required by the state to carry $5 million in coverage
Mm-hmm.
from every major underwriter out there is saying we'll cover you for $1 million. After that, we're just not going to cover you.
Right.
And for that $1 million, you're going to pay $160,000 in your premium annually.
Right.
And they're like, wait a minute, last year we only paid $15,000 for $1 million and $5 million coverage. So, well, last year we didn't have everybody and their mother knocking on your door to get.
Right. We didn't have a very large state actor that's very angry with us right now.
That's right.
That we've shut the money spigot off to their country, and they're willing to do the same to us, through any means necessary. So, yeah. I mean, that's the reality of the industry, right? Is that you could be doing everything right internally and even have the best controls if your external threats grow to such an extent where the insurers, their actuaries are looking at it and like, hey, the numbers just don't work out. You end up where we are now, and
You're exactly right. And it seems like in healthcare, especially third party risk is a giant piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, huge. It is in every sector, honestly. Like it was, I've worked in a lot of different. I've worked in retail. I mentioned that previously, and I worked at American Eagle.
I should have mentioned that.
Yeah. So in town here, in Pittsburgh, and it's affecting everyone. I think. Supply chain issues that we saw, from the pandemic, upsetting supply chains. But even before that, it was really critical during that time period, right, of making sure that you have good partners in your supply chain that can get the product to market. And you have to do your due diligence on these vendors to make sure that they're not going to get taken down. And if they are taken down, how, what do they have controls and do they have BCDR plans in place, to make sure that they're back up and running and can facilitate what you need. I think it hits all sectors. I think in healthcare is even more so, like we were talking about, because the highly regulated information that we have, we have to be very careful about how that's handled. And at Village, we have a pretty robust program where not only are we looking at the vendor itself, but if they're, supplying software, we're looking at things like SBOMs and making sure that, things that we would have never done even 4 years ago, 5 years ago, are now just standard operating procedure, of making sure that you're doing that due diligence. And then you run into the issue of fourth parties, right? So you have your third parties and their third parties. Like, how do you handle that? And how do you, where do you draw the line? You'd have to have a huge staff to kind of drill down into all the vendors. So then again, you come back to risk. You risk rank these vendors and say, okay, which ones are our most critical? Which ones are on the critical path? If this vendor went down, what kind of impact would it have? Put those in a different category. You're spending more time looking at their information and really scrutinizing their SOC reports and following up on that. So again, you're just taking, because you can't staff, you can't have 100 people in your vendor risk management staff in most companies. You have to make some risk-based decisions and kind of stratify it, and then dive into the ones you really need to get more information on. They're more critical to the business, and then make a risk decision. You just say, as a company, this is below our risk threshold. It's okay. We'll do this amount of work on it. It can be nerve-wracking, though. It is a big issue because most companies aren't developing everything in house. You're buying third-party software, right, and you're cobbling it together to create your network. And there could be weak points all over the place. So you have to always be vigilant and constantly monitoring these folks and making sure that they're doing the things that they say they're going to do in their contracts and holding them accountable. It's a challenge.
So I'm going to pick on uh, one particular actor in the healthcare industry that I have personal experience with, and that's the doctor.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I'll give you a little quick background here. Way back in the day, uh, there was a company called Computer Associates, and they used to have an identity and access management solution, and I was engaged with that in the market.
Sure.
We had a lot of healthcare customers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the one thing that we could never ever get it to follow any kind of a discipline were the physicians.
Oh yeah.
It was
Nothing's changed.
it was an it was it I mean, I just don't know what to say other than that. You
Yeah.
just couldn't. I mean, you
Yeah.
can't manage them. And the number of, when we look at even today, and it's a serious issue in that when we look at the principles of cybersecurity, where you're giving least privileged access,
Mm-hmm.
that you should do that. You have what may be a physician by day, but in the evening, that person is moonlighting, even in one of your other facilities, as a contract doctor. And that happens all the time,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And they should, their roles change, their privileges should change as a result. But what we often see, the reality of it is that there's a lot of healthcare data that goes out on these phones, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they're using it. Can't tell you. I've seen it where radiology labs will send MRIs right to the doctors because they also don't have time, and I understand that,
Yeah.
right? They're like,
Yeah.
send me this thing. What's your mobile number? Clink.
Yeah.
Right? How do you have any guidance for other people that may be listening on how to deal with this?
Uh, all right. Start with empathy. So you got to start understanding where's the doctor coming from. All right. So the way my advice would be, first put yourself in the physician's shoes to try to understand their mindset. The physician, and I love our physicians, but they can be challenging to, persuade.
You're just so polite.
That's how I've stayed in the industry for 20 years.
Yeah.
You gotta be polite. But there can be some challenges there because, at the end of the day, they are really focused on patient care.
Yes, they are, and they should be.
And they should be. That's exactly what you want out of your physician. You don't want them worrying about, the 100% focused on security. A little bit of focus, sure, but that shouldn't be their number one concern. Their number one concern is, I've got this patient. He is exhibiting, or she is exhibiting, these symptoms. I need to get them to health. I need to make them whole. How do I do that? How can I do that in the most efficient way possible, and also provide a good experience for my patient as well? Because I'd say almost to the person, all of our physicians care about that. So first is try to understand their mindset. Where are they at? They are trying to provide care as seamlessly as possible, and trying to get that patient as well as quickly as possible, and that is their number one concern. Our concern is different in security. Not that we don't care about the patients, we absolutely do. um, you know,
I hope so.
we've
I
all
mean,
been patients, so you look at it from that perspective. But um, I think we need to make solutions for these physicians that are seamless and they don't have to think about it. So how can we do
Chris,
things,
yeah.
that it, because if you make and I say this a lot, and anybody on my teams that are probably listening to this are probably sick of hearing it, but if you make the control super difficult, like it's a very good control, you put in a control that is just it's covering all the bases, it's dropping your risk near zero, great control, but it's difficult to actually implement and difficult to use, people are going to find ways around it. That, I mean, your end users are going to look
Uh,
for ways to get around this thing because it's just so difficult to do it. So you have to make controls that are effective, but also very easy for the folks that need to interact with them. It's easy for them to comply with those controls. So how do you do that? I think with physicians specifically, with mobile devices and things, um, I think it starts with education, just bringing up their awareness. These are all very, very smart people. Um, you know, that's one thing you can bank on. So you can, like, play to that. They are often very, they're students for life. They are willing to learn. I think if you can present, some materials just to get their awareness up, that's step one. Step two is implementing as many automated controls. If they need to use a mobile device, can you convince them to use, like, hey, we are going to provide you with a device possibly that's been hardened. It's got all the software that you need to interact with your clients. Work with your infrastructure teams to build ways for them to share information with their patients, which are seamless, that work in the real world, in applications that are easy for the physician to use. That's a huge tall order, right? I don't think anybody's done it super well, but I think that's the direction that we need to move into, because you need to, if you're relying on the fact that everybody's got to be super vigilant and security conscious all the time for your security program to work, it's going to fail. You need to make it super easy for them to comply. You need to make it super easy for them to, you almost want to make it easier for them to use the control than it is to go outside of the control. So if they had to, like, jump between an email and something else, like, make it easier. This is a better experience for you. It's a better experience for the patient. Prove it out. I think sometimes it's going to be road shows. You're going to have to convince some of these doctors of your plans and why this is better. But I think if you can connect with them on the things that they are concerned about, which is, hey, this is going to help you deliver care better. This is going to be a better experience for your patient. It's easy. But getting there, I think, is a challenge, and it takes investment in hardware, software solutions. It's going to take probably an investment on your internal teams to make all those things work and work consistently. Doctors, again, don't want to have any impediments to that patient care. So if you can show that, hey, we're allowing you to exchange this information in a way that is compliant with HIPAA, it's protecting the patient's information, and it's also providing a better experience for both you and the patient, I think that's the direction you need to go in. How do you get there? It's like eating an elephant one bite at a time. You just start working on it, and making sure you have a long-term vision, but it's stage gating it along the way so you can show some value as you go down that path. But
all the healthcare professionals we've had on, that is probably the most practical 5 minutes I've heard in a long time.
Well, thanks.
That's actionable, and it makes perfect. That makes sense, and we often talk about that in cybersecurity. There's a lot of theoreticals, but unless you can make something actionable, it really doesn't matter. And what you're talking about makes all the sense in the world. Unfortunately, a lot of the automations right now are not being done to a degree where it becomes completely transparent to someone like a physician.
Right.
But that's incumbent upon us as cybersecurity professionals to start thinking of those use cases, and with a mindset of empathy as to what's going on, and the realization that shadow IT is absolutely going to happen.
Yep.
And control or lack thereof will take place if we don't.
Yeah. You almost, at this day and age, you're 100% right. Shadow IT is going to happen. You have to almost embrace it and say, let's, and try and, instead of trying to put out all these fires that keep popping up, it's how do we build solutions with knowing that is going to occur, and in addressing it, like, pragmatically.
Well, Jake, I apologize about some of the technical difficulties. I know we're up here on the 1 minute mark. We did want to give you the last minute here. If you have any talks that are coming up, or conferences you're attending, or anything you want to plug at all, even if it's a charity, let us know.
Yeah.
Please share it with the audience.
Yeah, nothing really to plug. And just check out VillageMD if you're in a Walgreens, and you see a VillageMD logo on that. Know that there's a physician office either in that Walgreens, or there's one coming shortly. So, give it a shot, and that's about it.
Well, Jake, we hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much. It was delightful to talk to you.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much.
Take care.